21. Run! Gryph yelled as he punched urgency into his own legs and rushed towards the far end of the massive gallery. Behind them, a swarm of spider-like automatons skittered after them on 8 metal legs. None were yet close enough to attack, but they moved much faster than the group and would soon catch them. Gryph glanced back and used Analyze. Thalmir Arachnid, Level 6, H 150, S 300, M 100, SP 0. Thalmir arachnids are the most common of the Thalmir automaton constructs. They spend most of their time hidden in the small passages that parallel the main thoroughfares and passageways of Thalmir cities and provide maintenance services. In cases of extreme emergency, they can defend the city. They are individually weak, but as a swarm, they can quickly overwhelm even the most powerful of adventuring parties. Strengths unknown. Immunities unknown. Weaknesses unknown. Shit! Wick exclaimed, using an earth swear word that Gryph had accidentally taught the gnome. There are more of them ahead of us! Gryph snapped his eyes to the front and then to each side and saw that Wick was only half right. And to the left! They're hurting us! Ovram yelled above the ever-growing cacophony and sprinted towards an arched doorway to the right. Successfully, Gryph said, and followed the yellow-eyed Zaidai as fast as he was able. Mirthandir spun around and raised his staff over his head. Keep moving! He yelled, and then chanted in some incomprehensible language that even Gryph's gift of tongues could not translate. Perhaps I need to hear the language clearly to understand, Gryph thought, but put the need out of his mind as the sound of metal legs clacking on stone grew closer. Mirthandir brought the staff down onto the stone floor with an audible crack, and pulses of shimmering gray energy spread from the point of contact. The first pulse flowed over the advancing swarm, and their progress slowed as if the fabric of space-time was reaching up to grab the advancing automatons. A second pulse slowed the swarm ever more until another wave of the spider constructs hit the field, and then their speed increased as the added weight of the swarm pushed against the rubbery surface of the field. Tifala, Ovrim, Wick, and Zeg all reached the relative safety of the passageway and turned to guard the opening. Mirthandir grunted and forced more mana into his staff, and another wave flowed forth. Gryph rushed to his side, skewering an automaton that had squeezed through the field. Mirthandir sent a sideways glance at Gryph. Get to the passage. I cannot hold them much longer. I'm covering your back, Gryph said, and saw the anger in the elf's shoulders. But his spell cost too much effort for him to turn his attention from the task. We do not leave people behind. If I let go, they'll be on us before we reach the passage. Gryph cast flying stalactite from each hand, unleashing a pair of stone missiles at 2 of the spiders that had nearly eased their way through the field. The first stalactite smacked against the sturdy carapace, knocking the arachnid onto its back, but dealing more cosmetic damage than actual. The second missile of stone caught the arachnid at the joint between foreleg and shell and punished the construct with a critical hit. It slumped to the floor, leaking more of the same golden oil present in every automaton they'd encountered so far. Gryph had no time to celebrate as more of the machines pushed their way through the reality distortion field. One scuttled towards Mirthandir, and Gryph dumped mana into his elven boots of deafness. The soft leather boots seemed to thrum with energy as Gryph felt his speed increase. He drew his spear from his back, snapped it to its full length, and leapt forward. He was a blur of motion as he thrust down again and again with his spear, puncturing arachnids that gushed oil like spurts of golden blood. The swarm kept coming. "We're running out of time!" Gryph yelled, but his voice was drowned out by the clacking of several hundred metal legs smacking against the granite floor. Mirthandir couldn't hear him. Is the damn fool planning on sacrificing himself? Gryph thought, and his mind flew back to the comment the steward had made on the Prince Regent. He is rash and will sacrifice himself for others. Damn it, Gryph thought, as another gout of oil erupted from an impaled arachnid. Gryph's eyes widened at the spreading pool, and an idea came to him. He gripped his spear like a hockey stick and slap-shot the downed construct towards the passageway. His aim was true, and it skittered across the granite floor to Ovrim, who arrested its passage with his foot. The Zaidai looked up in confusion, but Gryph had no time to explain, as he harpooned another of the small bots. He shot that construct the other way, where it bumped lightly against the back of Mirthandir's boots. Another line of oil left in its wake. Gryph sheathed his spear again and grabbed the length of spider silk rope from his side. As his other hand moved through the motions of his air magic spell Animate Rope, he realized the two lengths of spider silk had rejoined. Cool. Self-healing rope. He threw the rope towards Mirthandir. It took on a life of its own, and, under Gryph's direction, it snaked around the elf lord's waist. A small grunt of surprise came from the elf as Gryph turned and tossed the other end to Ovrim. The Zaidai immediately understood what Gryph intended and pulled on the rope. Mirthandir nearly toppled over backwards as the tension snapped the rope tight, but instinct took over and he leaned forward, letting the slick oil and the adjudicator's muscles do the work. Gryph backed up and kept pace with the sliding elf lord, using his reality-wiping shield as cover. They reached the passage, and Ovrim commanded the rope to detach from the elf lord and coil itself back at his waist. Mirthandir nodded at Gryph as the party backed down the passage. There was no door, but at least the swarm's numbers would be constrained by the limited space. Ovrim guarded their retreat as the group ran down the tunnel towards an unknown fate. Wick rounded a corner, and Gryph heard the gnome yell, "Door! There's a door ahead!" The group increased their speed, turned the corner, and rushed to safety. Ovrim slipped in just before the closest arachnid's leg could become a doorstop. Wick tossed the crossbar into its slot, securing the door. Gryph felt the artificial boost to his speed fade, and with it came the inevitable stamina hit. His breath came in ragged gasps, and he nearly threw up, feeling like a man who'd barely finished a marathon he hadn't properly trained for. "Everyone all right?" Mirthandir asked. Nods from all around assured him that everyone was in good health. "That was ethereal magic," Wick said, eyeing the Prince Regent with fearful awe. "Ethereal? Are you sure?" Ovrim asked, eyes snapping up to Mirthandir. Wick tapped the goggles he'd pulled over his eyes. "Top-of-the-line maker goggles. My pop spent a bundle on 'em. Add their cost to his disappointment in his son." Ovrim gave the elf lord an icy glare. "What's the big deal?" Gryph asked. "After all, I have 100% affinity for every sphere, including ethereal." "Ethereal magic is Arbaleth magic," Ovrim said, his hand falling to the hilt of his sword and slipping a few inches of the red bleed metal from its sheath. "It is," Mirthandir said, with no hint of apology or nervousness in his tone. "I told you, I have studied many things commonly believed to be lost. Some are even considered taboo. I am a law master. I seek knowledge wherever it is found." The explanation failed to soothe Overim's suspicions, and his hand never wavered from his weapon. Mirthandir eyed him levelly. "Are you going to kill me, Zaidai? Take my life because you do not understand something? Because ancient fears have poisoned your soul?" The Prince Regent said, somehow seeming to grow more regal. "I would have thought you, of all people, would not let ancient hatreds turn you down the path of darkness." Overim glared at the Elf Lord for several long heartbeats. Gryph thought he could see the man shaking, trying desperately to control himself. Finally, the Zaidai released his weapon, and the snick of his blade finding its home was audible in the deep silence.
"Zeg know ethereal magic too."
"No, you don't," Wick said, and the imp scowled, but then hung his head.
No, Zeg know not. Zeg tell funny joke."
Then an unnerving bark that lay somewhere between a chihuahua and a flatulent seal erupted from the imp's mouth. "Your jokes suck," Wick said, interrupting Zeg's disturbing laughter. Zeg just glared at Wick for a moment before the imp's eyes went wide.
"Creepy man stare at Zeg."
All eyes turned in the direction that Zeg was looking. The wall on the far side of the room was a floor-to-ceiling pane of glass. Behind it stood the oddest man Gryph had ever seen. He was tall, reaching nearly 7 feet, and muscled like an Olympic gymnast. Zeg had been right, as the deepest pair of black eyes he'd ever seen turned from Zeg to stare at Gryph. He was hairless and wasn't wearing a stitch of clothing, revealing a blank area where his genitalia should be. Somehow that lack made the man more unnerving. He reminded Gryph of the Ken doll Bryn had owned as a child, the one whose lustrous blonde hair had been shorn clean off when Finn had thought it would be fun to use the doll to stir a can of paint thinner. One of the arachnid automatons sat perched on the man's wide shoulder, like a parrot in a bad pirate movie. All around him, on the walls of the room beyond the glass, a dozen more of the spider constructs clung. The small slit that was the man's mouth turned upwards in an awkward, almost smile, and then the man waved at them.
"Hi,"
the man said, waving his hand back and forth in an unwitting caricature of the Queen of England.